Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our GDE zone. My name's Bryony, and I'll be chairing today. I'm really excited about this zone because everyone that's speaking is going to give us a real insight into what they do, but they're also going to give you some practical lessons about what you can do in the future. And then we want you to take the conversation off stage and go to our networking area, which is just over there, so you can have deep and meaningful conversations with the people that are here today, and actually pick their brains and ask them how you can apply the things that they do in your own work. We also have research that's going on here today about blueprinting. Our colleague Ian Fletcher is going to be in charge of that. He's currently not here, so I'm not sure why I'm pointing that way. And if all of you can give your insights and your views, it's really valuable for the future of GDEs. So just to begin with then, if I can introduce Adrian. He's going to deliver our first speech, which is all about the reflection from the Solent.
Thank you. The mic is on. Good. Thanks for coming today, day 2 of an event. Hope you had a good day yesterday. I learned something yesterday. I met a guy last night who couldn't pronounce his F's or his TH's. I said, well, you can't say fairer than that. So I'm surprised you came to the GDE zone, because GDEs are so 2017, aren't they, really? I thought you'd all be getting involved with the lacquers, which are about to be announced. Anyway, I hadn't better waste any more of my valuable 15 minutes. This is me, Adrian Byrne. I'm the CIO at University Hospital Southampton, chair of the CIO network, and talking to you today about just a couple of things in our GDE programme. So I've got 15 minutes, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is not very long. So I will get on. I'm going to talk to you about just 2 or 3 things that we're doing, actually, mostly because in your programme it says Aid's going to talk to you about the whiteboard and something we're doing with sample requesting, sample 360, and a bit on personal health records. So I thought I'll talk about that then. This is our whiteboard. We've designed it, built it ourselves based on open data in our organisation. And really, I want to talk about a little bit about why things are not always as easy as they seem. Because anyone can just take data out of a system and throw it up onto a screen like this. Why wouldn't you do it, or why would you do it? If anyone walks onto a ward in a hospital, you'll see often traditional whiteboards that people write on, and you'll see magnets that they stick on, usually saying things like the patient needs turning every 4 hours, or they need a special kind of nurse or something like that. So some of that data that's written up onto those whiteboards is not collected anywhere else, actually. So if you have the ambition to replace those whiteboards with something that just throws your patient list up on the screen, you'll have an immediate challenge, because you then have to collect the kind of data that sits in icons on here. So really, I'll just ask you to think about, if you're designing this kind of project and you intend to do it, and I absolutely recommend that you should, then you have to think about how you're going to also collect some of that data. So in other words, you have to create a database, and then you have to store data in it, obviously, and make sure it is stored with accuracy and integrity and all of that. But the benefits when you've achieved it and when you've done something like this are your hospital control room will now have a view over the whole hospital that they've simply never had before. And if you're a large hospital like us, you'll have something like maybe 20, maybe more than 20 bed managers. It's crazy in this day and age, spend most of their time just running around the organisation doing status updates. And this helps to alleviate the pressure there, and we can actually take some of the hours down in that now. This, I can tell you, has been a very popular project and is a very popular tool with the nurses. And one more thing on it before I do get off the subject. People thought that this might be a little bit too flash, putting up these as touch screens. And it's an interesting thought on user interface. I'm quite a fan of looking at something called UX, UI, user experience, user interface. And if you use a touch screen to do this kind of work, then you have a whole different experience. Our hospitals have something called board round, so they all get around and they discuss what's going to happen with patients on this day, the day today. And if you have someone there on the side using a keyboard and a mouse, they are effectively out of that meeting, if you can imagine that situation. Whereas if they're interacting with the board in front of the people, they are a part of the meeting. So there is something about that piece of tactile technology that actually adds to the user experience. So that's the lesson on that one. Oops. Just an additional thing, I'll just throw that in. But once you've got access to your information, you can do things like, if there's a diabetic on your ward and you click on the diabetic symbol, which is on there, it's not just telling you they're diabetic anymore, it's going to fetch the last few blood glucose and HbA1c results onto that screen immediately so that the staff know if there's anything that they need to do. So, in your program, you'll see that I'm allowed to talk about something called Sample 360. This is another interesting thing. We put AutoComms in 2003. And back then, there wasn't much kind of concept of mobility or small mobility, wireless networking everywhere and that kind of thing. So we did samples and labels and forms, and the forms had labels on them, and you stuck the labels on the samples, and the form went with the sample to the lab, and the lab would then, do things with the form, usually just have a quick look at it and throw it away, actually. We realised it was superfluous to requirements a long time ago. And allied to this, back in 2012, we all had to do these printed wristbands on patients with barcodes on it. And actually, lots of hospitals have got these, well, they have to have a printed wristband with a barcode on, but are using them for very little, actually. Really only blood tracking. That's about all they get used for in general in our hospitals in this country. But now we are starting to use those wristbands for other things. So if you have your venesectors who come onto the ward with a list of patients on a mobile device and they scan the patient's wristband, then the device tells them the kind of blood samples that they need to take, prints the labels onto the bottle, and they're away. And this is also very popular. It reduces the number of errors that happen in sample requesting. You would not believe how many labels get stuck on the wrong patient in hospitals, and sample rejection for various reasons. This manages that down. Even taking those blood forms away. The blood forms that we use were 4p each, and we do like millions of these. So there's a saving in this kind of project. But as usual, there are things that you need to watch out for. So I like to sort of give a point on things to watch out for. What we found was we couldn't just say that we will make the request and print the labels and expect the form to go away. What we actually found was the venesectors, when they came onto the ward traditionally, they used the fact that the forms had been placed in a box to tell them who they were going to bleed. So then you have to start thinking about how you're going to handle that process. So it's the same as the whiteboard again. There is always something down in the detail that will make things more difficult for you to do. And you have to solve another problem that you didn't think was there before you started. But that is a popular project. It's a clinical safety project. The product Sample 360 was designed with us within our GDE and is now available from a company called MSoft, if you've heard of them or want to look them up. Another thing that we're achieving in University Hospital Southampton is our personal health record. And I talk about this a lot, so I'm not going to go on about it today. But it's really two things. It's a back-end personal health record that sits in the Azure cloud, and then separately a front-end patient experience piece, which is a full interaction between the patient and our clinicians. It has a high level of maturity according to the models that exist around how a personal health record should sit. So you can either have a record that is just effectively the front end on your EPR, which is a tethered model, as it's referred to, IDCR front end. You can have health applications that are not linked to anything, that anyone can go and download from the App Store. And of course, the ideal model sits in the middle, where an application actually connects to the record and creates a much better user experience and allows you to transact properly with the patient. Class, I don't know if people have heard of Class. I see Jeremy's in the audience this morning from Class, but they have done some work on PHR maturity models, and I use this diagram a little bit. It kind of shows that where you don't have a fully connected model, you can only do very basic things, and it's quite obvious really that the more you get into the maturity around it, you can do things like pre-op assessment. So I'll just stop on that one and say that with pre-op assessment, we list about 300 patients a week. And every one of those is going to spend about an hour, up to an hour, with a nurse, allied to the anaesthetic process, deciding whether they're fit for the operation, whether they've got any comorbidities that need to be considered, that kind of thing. We have patients that can now sort of enter that data online. That takes that time down. If you can save a bit of a nurse's time 300 times a week, then you're going to do some fairly important things in terms of efficiency for your organisation. So my point here is that there is actually a business case for doing this work. It's not just about giving people access to their record. It's patient-centred. How many times do you hear that the system is patient-centred? How many systems are really patient-centred? Like nearly none, I think. So patient records are patient-centred. We've created a brand called the Open PHR. It's actually our trademark. And that sits in the middle of this. So, as I mentioned, two sides to it, really. The back-end personal health record, the front-end website. We actually host for many other organisations now. We've got up to around 10,000 patients. Website, obviously, very touchscreen friendly. Now, some of the diseases that we're working with, Crohn's disease, cardiology, doing some work with the British Heart Foundation, actually. Cystic fibrosis, we're not short of ideas and patients to work with, basically. And there are savings and also user experience, patient experience. I'll just give you an example. If a patient went to have a blood test for their prostate cancer, if they're in remission, under the traditional model, they would have their blood taken and they may come back to clinic 3 or 4 weeks later to see those results. I've got a film of a patient actually who had their blood taken in the morning at their GP, and they logged in just after lunch and got their results. That's taken away 3 weeks of anxiety for that patient. That's a map just showing that when you build this untethered model and the personal health record and run it in the cloud, it means that actually you're not tethered to any particular hospital. So I mentioned that we've got about 10,000 users, and that map just shows that they're all over the country, basically. They're not our customers. They are customers of other hospitals. So that, how much time do I have? If I've got a second, because in the program, it says Aid's going to talk about messaging. And I am. So, this is a system that we're putting in. And you'd recognize the kind of user interface, WhatsApp style, if you like. But if I was to say, and I would normally be scanning a patient wristband at this point, but I'm just going to put in a patient ID. I see there's folks from InterSystems in the audience today. This is going through our InterSystems Trust Integration Engine, and that has pulled back a patient from our index. Is this the patient I'm looking for? Our system, it's a messaging application, but I can say, yeah, it is. What do I want to do? Oh, I want to look at their blood results. and that's gone through our tie to our order comms. Now, that can happen as a part of a conversation within a team, and I can use FHIR messaging. People have heard of FHIR, the Fast Health Interoperability Resource. I can do things now like push acknowledgement. I can acknowledge those results within the message, send that acknowledgement back into the order comms. I can also subscribe to patients. I haven't really got time to show you that now. I can show you offline, but I can subscribe to a patient and say, I'm interested in this patient for the next 8 hours. Any results that come through our integration engine, just push them into my queue so I can see them on this system. So there's a real benefit in having open data platforms, and I talk about this a lot as well. This is using the concept of open data. The whiteboard is using the concept of open data. The personal health record uses the concept of open data. So that's what our GDE is all about. I hope you can see it's beneficial to work like this. Thanks for listening.
We're quite short on time, but if anyone does have any questions that they want to ask, we can take a couple. One thing I would ask is you've shown us a lot of tools and things, but what would you say to people who want to implement them but aren't necessarily 100% sure that they can in their own organisation? What's the first step for them?
Well, I always say to people, you've got to have access to your data, that's really important. Or you're just bound by what a supplier is going to be willing to do for you or willing to even charge you to do. So I think it's a really important principle to make sure that you always own the data that's in your systems so that you can do some innovative things.
Thank you very much.